And we're now just hours away from the president meeting with President Zelensky at the White House. So what kind of meeting are we going to see? Will it be like the last time we saw these two at the White House in February, where they got into a shouting match and the meeting ended shortly after? Will there be one-on-one talks like their chat ahead of the Pope's funeral in April? The two actually met again in June at NATO, where both men walked away, seemingly having to have moved past that February blow-up.
He was very nice, actually. You know, we had little rough times sometimes. He was couldn't have been nicer. I think he'd like to see an end to this. I do.
Joining me now to talk about this, John Bolton, President Trump's former national security advisor and former U.S. ambassador to the UN under George W. Bush. Good morning, Ambassador.
Good morning. Glad to be with you.
I've heard a lot of people talk about this meeting with Putin over the weekend in not great terms. You say there's a silver lining to this bad summit. What's that silver lining?
Well, I think it's a mistake from Ukraine's perspective to try and seek a ceasefire before serious negotiations begin. Now, that's a minority position. I certainly concede that. But you have to look at the history of what happens in these kinds of disputes when you have a ceasefire along the existing battle lines. There's a very grave risk for Ukraine that the battle lines gets frozen, and as talks drag on and drag on and drag on, that ceasefire line becomes the new boundary. I think Ukraine, if it has the support of Europe and the United States, and that's a big caveat, should continue the struggle against Russia, if at all possible, should try to put some of Russia's gains in reverse and show to Putin that the use of force is simply not going to prevail. That would be the better outcome. And now Trump, by saying he doesn't want a ceasefire, may wake the Ukrainians and may even wake the Europeans up to the danger of the ceasefire scenario.
I also want to ask you about the security guarantees. We're hearing from Steve Witkoff referencing this, talking about a potential security guarantee that is not being in NATO, not having Article 5 capabilities, but somehow would make Ukraine borders safe. How did you interpret this? And do you believe it, given your experience negotiating with Russia?
Well, I listened to Witkoff's answer to Jake Tapper yesterday several times, and the more I listened to it, the less I understood it. After he mentions Article 5-like guarantees, he talks about enshrinement in Russian law of a commitment not to seek further territorial gains in Ukraine and not to seek further territorial gains in Europe generally. I don't understand what the connection is if he's talking about counting on Russian promises and Russian laws not to commit further aggression. We've got a long history where that hasn't been the case dating back to the days of the Soviet Union. And I don't understand how Article 5 fits in there. I'm more worried actually now by reports that seem to be more and more common in the news media that what the president told the European leaders and Zelensky in his phone call after the Alaska summit was that Putin's proposal was, give me all of the Donetsk province that my troops don't already hold, and then I will commit not to seek any further territory. If that's the deal that the president and Putin agreed on, it's going to run into a brick wall when they pass it on to Zelensky.
We were hearing from the president on Truth Social, and you came in for criticism, where he was basically arguing people like yourselves are kind of talking in a way that prevents peace from happening, that prevents the end of this war. What's your response to that, and even sort of how the president is approaching Russia in this process?
Well, I think the criticism he's making is silly. You know, the old saying, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. I think the president's approaching this process because he wants a Nobel Peace Prize, and I think he's worried that it may be slipping away from him because if, as I think most observers saw the Alaska summit, I didn't see any retreat by Russia from any of the principles that Putin and others have been articulating for years. And I don't see any real signs that whatever Zelensky might say would come anywhere close to accommodating the Russians, meaning that while peace is possible always at some point down the road, it's not going to happen anytime soon. And that means that the president's hopes of getting the Nobel Peace Prize are getting more remote. I might also just say one small point. The NATO Peace Prize rules require that nominations for the year in question, that would be 2025, have to be submitted by January the 31st. So, of course, the Nobel Peace Prize Committee, I suppose, can always ignore its own rules, but if they stick to their rules, Trump's not eligible for it this year anyway.
Before I let you go, what do you want to hear out of this meeting today, and specifically from European leaders who obviously all scrambled to be here? I don't even know what success would look like for them coming out of today. What do you think it is?
Well, as I say, my view on the ceasefire question is very much a minority. So I expect the Europeans and probably Zelensky will continue to push for a ceasefire and let Trump answer why he doesn't want one. Trump and I happen to agree, coincidentally, on the ceasefire point. His reasons are different from mine, and I think incorrect. He thinks he can get to a full-scale peace plan more quickly that way. I don't think that's possible.
John Bolton, President Trump's former national security advisor and former U.S. ambassador to the UN. Thanks so much for speaking with us.
Well, thank you.